Hey everybody, welcome. Thanks so much for tuning in and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Yeah.
It's Marty, how was your New Year's?
Dude, it's been great so far. I'm glad 2020 is behind us.
Oh man,
Actually,
it's
it's
so
still
good.
2020.
It's so
when we're
good that it's
filming.
behind us. Yeah,
know.
allegedly.
Yes.
No, hey, my name is Dane. I'm the high school pastor at Willamette. Who are you, friend?
Hey everybody, my name is Marty and I'm the students pastor at our Beaverton campus. And thanks so much for tuning in.
Yeah.
We're starting a new series for the new year and it's
Exactly.
called Assembly Required. And just to sort of set this series up, when we still lived in San Diego, I bought my kids this incredible play structure. It was amazing. It had 2 swings, it had a rock climbing wall, and a treehouse fort. And I brought it home and I gave it to my kids and they were so excited. They're like, yeah, you're the best dad ever. I'm like, I know, thank you.
Obviously.
And they immediately started getting their shoes on like they were gonna go outside and play with it. They're like, let's go play with it. And I said, now hold on, kids. There's some assembly required. It's gonna take your dad a little bit of time to build this play structure. And they said, well, how long? And I said, well, I don't know. Hopefully you'll be able to play with it by the end of the night. Well, when I opened up that box, it was actually 3 boxes, and it was about 600 pieces, and I quickly figured out that there was no way I was gonna be able to finish this in time. It required some tools that I didn't even know existed, and so I had to call one of my friends to come over and help me build it, and it took us days. So about 3 days later, after blood, sweat, and tears, we finally got that play set up and my kids could play on it. But it took some assembly. There was assembly required. And when it comes to our life and our faith and our relationship with God, this is often the case where a lot of times we just want to become the people who God designed and made and created us to be, but we hope that we'll just sort of fall into that by accident.
Yeah.
And we want to be people who step into this new year. You may have some plans and purposes that you're hoping for to be a new person this year, to do things differently, but to be the people that God's made us to be, there's some assembly required.
Yeah.
And that's what this series is all about. So each week, we're gonna look at one thing that we can grow in and form a habit to see produced in our life.
Yeah.
So what we're gonna see today is that when it comes to joy, we don't grow and form joy in our life by accident.
Yeah.
Joy doesn't happen by accident. It happens when we choose the habit of prayer.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to actually look at this quote from a man named Charles Reed. He says this, he says, "We sow a thought and reap action. We sow an action and reap a habit. We sow a habit and we reap character. We sow a character and we reap destiny." Right, and so, this series about talking about habits and specific things that we can learn, it's actually so much more important than just like what our day-to-day lives look like. We're actually talking about what your future looks like, right? And what kind of person you're going to become. And New Year's is a great time to start looking at that stuff. And it's also an amazing opportunity, right, when you're in high school to start focusing on what habits, or middle school, to start focusing on what habits you want the person of your future to hold. Right? Because if you look at your life right now, I'm assuming it's not perfect, because none of us are perfect, right? And so do you want your life, do you want your habits to look the exact same today as they do 10 years from now? And if your answer is yes, then don't do anything. But likely, you probably want to look different 10 years from now than you do now, right? And spiritually speaking, I pray and I hope that none of us are in the same spot in our relationship with Jesus in 2021 as we will be in 2031, right? I hope in the next 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is, we can set habits this year that will change the direction and alter the direction of our life to look more like Jesus. And that's a super lofty goal, and it starts with what we're doing today, which is exactly what this series is all about. So we're going to look at a couple of verses written in the New Testament, right, by a man named James. In James chapter 1, he starts off by saying this. All right, in verse 2, we pick up. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy." Right? "For we know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow. For when your endurance is fully developed, you will be perfect and complete, needing nothing. If you need wisdom, ask our generous God, and he will give it to you. He will not rebuke you for asking. But when you ask him, be sure that your faith is in God alone. Do not waver, for a person with divided loyalty is as unsettled as a wave of the sea that is blown and tossed by the wind. Such people should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Their loyalty is divided between God and the world. They are unstable in everything they do. And that's exactly what we're going to be looking at. That first point that James makes, right? Regardless of what 2021 brings us, we have the opportunity to count it all joy when troubles come our way. Right? You have the opportunity to count it as joy when troubles come your way. And this is an important thing to kind of tackle, because where do our troubles come from? Oftentimes when we're faced with hardships or adversity or whatever you want to call it, we want to identify where it came from rather than reacting in a way that God might want us to react. And so 3 quick points, right? Where do our troubles possibly come from? Right? And the first one is super simply this, right? Troubles can come, not always, but can certainly come from Satan. Right? He is a real being, right? And I think I think C.S. Lewis has a quote that says something like the greatest lie ever, like that Satan ever played, or the greatest trick he ever played was to convince the world that he doesn't exist. Right? But he very much does, and we lie to ourselves to think that he is not at work sometimes in our lives. So we just have to call that out. Sometimes troubles in our life come from the evil one, right? The deceiver. Second place trouble might come from, and this might sound crazy, is troubles can be allowed by or sent by God. Right? And even you have instances in Scripture where we can see times where God has sent troubles or allowed for hardships for his people for a specific purpose. Right? And the third thing, right, is trouble can just kind of come as a normal part of the ebb and flow of life. Troubles can just kind of be like what happened in life, right? Sometimes it's Satan, sometimes God allows it, and sometimes, honestly, like, it just happens, right? Life is not easy because of sin entering the world, right? We let trouble in Genesis chapter 3, and the reality is we cannot live perfect, trouble-free lives because sin is reality of our world. But here's the point. Regardless of where trouble comes from, you and I have the opportunity to rise to the occasion, because when trouble comes, you and I experience this thing called testing.
Yes. James says, count it all joy when you fall into troubles of many kinds, knowing that the trouble and the testing of your faith can produce something in you.
Yeah.
To test means to prove the quality or worth of someone or something through difficulty. To prove the quality or worth of someone or something through difficulty. Now, you and I love things that are tested, but we don't like to be tested. But I love to know, for example, when I go to the doctor, or if I have to go into surgery, that this surgeon has been tested, right? The last thing you want to hear
This is my first surgery.
This is my first surgery. Never done this before, you guys. I didn't practice.
Yeah,
but
that'd be terrifying.
Good night. And then and you want to know that your airbag in your car has been
so
tested. Same is true for our life. We don't magically grow to become the people who God wants us to be, but we do grow through testing. Mm-hmm. And so testing doesn't produce faith in us, James says, but our faith is tested in trials, not produced. And another way to put this is that when you and I go through difficulty, it's like our cup gets shaken. So just imagine that this cup is your life, and there's something in it. But when testing comes, when difficulty comes, your cup gets shaken, and then something comes out. In this case, it's delicious little gumdrops.
I would love one. Yeah, actually, I'm going to eat one right now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I better not, because I have to talk.
Yeah,
but
I got time. Yeah.
In some cases, when difficulty comes our way, everybody, including you, get to see what's actually in your life, how genuine our faith really is. Do we have a difficulty, or do we have a faith that can allow for joy in the midst of difficulty? That's James' question. So count it all joy when you fall into various kinds of trouble, because your faith is being tested, and that can produce something in your life. And in this case, James talks about endurance, that we can be people who grow in endurance. To have an endurance means to stay under pressure for a long period of time. And that can be true of our life. Even whatever difficulties come our way, we can be people who have joy and who can remain under pressure for a long time.
Yeah. And so how do we do that, right? And every week, just like Marty said, we want to send you home with a tool or a new habit to employ in your life. Because simply just saying like, hey, just choose joy 2021 might not be that easy. And if you think about it, in the middle of hardships, like what is it going to take to access joy? It's going to take a change in perspective. It's going to take this thing called wisdom, which is exactly why the next thought that James has after talking about joy is he says, ask God for wisdom. He will give it to you freely, right? We have a generous God who desires to give his people wisdom. And so this is our practical habit. This is what I would love for you to walk home with, to talk in your small groups about, is simply this. In order to choose joy this year, let's ask for wisdom. Pray and ask God for wisdom. He is generous and wants to give you wisdom. And so what would it take for us to ask for wisdom? And so that's kind of where we want to leave you, right? Instead of letting trials happen and letting yourself be shaken, right? That cup and your gumdrops fall all over the place. Let's actually, in that moment, allow our cup to be shaken, but ask God for the wisdom to choose joy, even if 2021 brings crazier circumstances at you this year. I think that's kind of where we want to end it. And so, friends, we hope that you are watching this with your small group or with your family or something someone to discuss these things with. We're going to send you with some discussion questions. But thank you so much for tuning in. We are super excited about this series in the new year and knowing that we are going to have to double down on work and double down on adding habits to our lives to make us look more like Jesus. So, friends, thank you for tuning in. We will be with you next week. But until then, we'll see you next time.
See ya.